Hey, so anyone out there willing to admit you occasionally experience a little bit of road rage? You know, like when lanes are merging and somebody ignores the zippering rule and goes two cars in front of you. Maybe it's someone only doing the speed limit in the outside lane, which we know is a crime because the outside lane, the speed limit is not the limit, it's the speed minimum. And so you get a little bit of road rage there. My kryptonite is when I'm at a set of traffic lights, the light's red, I'm waiting behind another car or several cars, and the light turns green and the first car doesn't move because most of the time these days the driver is playing with their phone. Not good, people, not good. But have you ever noticed that you feel differently when it's you that's committing those crimes and, someone else is getting angry and you're thinking to yourself, hey, listen, I've got a perfectly good explanation as to why I'm doing these things, so leave me alone. Which I just kind of share that example to really highlight the fact that, we are quick to hope for forgiveness, but can be occasionally a little bit slow to offer forgiveness. And I really want to talk about that today. So this is the sixth and final week of a series we've simply called Set Free. And if you missed any of the first five installments, then you can either go back and watch them on this platform, or if you want to hear the audio version, you can get our podcast from all of the major podcast apps. Just search for Elevate Church Perth and we'll be there. You can just catch up. Simple as that. So, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, today I want to talk about set free to forgive. And it really recognizes that unforgiveness is one prison that holds too many people captive. And in fact, not just holds us captive, but unforgiveness kind of takes residence in our hearts and over time starts to eat us alive from the inside out. And I want to put it to us today. Whether you've been locked inside a prison of unforgiveness for a few weeks, a few months, a few years, or even a few decades, that it's actually possible to be set free and ultimately live free. Now, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to pretend it's easy to be set free from the prison of unforgiveness, but I just want to make sure you understand, and I'm going to do my best job to show you what it might look like to be set. That it's actually possible, not easy, but possible. And look, this journey of forgiveness, it really starts with us accepting God's forgiveness, us forgiving ourselves. Paul, in fact, who I'll explain a little bit more about him in a moment, but he wrote to the church in Ephesus and he encouraged them with this instruction: forgive one another as quickly and thoroughly as Christ forgave you. So this idea that forgiveness starts with what Jesus did for you, not what that person did against you. So, all right, if you've got your smartphone camera, scan this flow code. It's going to take you into the Bible app to the letter, it's called a book, but it's not really a book, letter called Philemon. Philemon. Yeah, anybody read Philemon lately? Some of you like, that's in the Bible? Yeah, it's in the Bible. So scan away, and while you're doing that, let me give you a little bit of context. So in this series, we've been dipping into some of the truths from Paul, who was one of the leaders of the early church, in some of the letters he wrote while he was at various times in prison, collectively known as Paul's prison letters. Well, this one was also a prison letter, And whilst the other prison letters were typically written to churches, this one was deeply personal because it was written to an individual, a guy named Philemon, who Paul seemingly had been like a mentor in the faith. And then Philemon, it appears, hosted and led like a house church. So Paul's writing to him. And in this very, 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 very short letter, we'll see there's three main characters. There's Paul, who's writing the letter. There's Philemon, who's seemingly quite a successful individual. He's the intended recipient of the letter. And then there's a third character. And this third character's name is Onesimus. Yeah, all right. And we discover that Onesimus had previously been a servant in Philemon's house and evidently had done something or some things to betray the trust that Philemon had placed in him, had been essentially let go from Philemon's house. And we don't know the circumstances, but ultimately Onesimus had wound up in prison, in the same prison as Paul. And Paul, as he was prone to do, had led Onesimus to place his faith in Jesus. All right, so that's the backstory. Now, what we discover is Onesimus had been released from prison. Again, we don't know the circumstances. Paul's still in prison. And Paul writes a letter to Philemon, essentially asking Philemon to take Onesimus back. But really what he's asking him to do is to forgive Onesimus and then take him back. So Paul writes this: I appeal to you, Philemon, to show kindness to my child, Onesimus, like faith's son, not biological son. I became his father in the faith while here in prison. Onesimus hasn't been much use to you in the past, but now he's very useful to both of us. I'm sending him back to you, and with him comes my own heart. Now, here's a very important thing to understand. The name Onesimus means useful. And Paul contradicts that idea that his name means useful, because he said, first of all, yeah, okay, Philemon, I know that Onesimus, useful, hadn't been very useful to you in the past, but he's changed. He's not that person anymore. In fact, he's now very useful. Now, I don't have time to go into that today. That's not the big idea of today's message, but I just don't want to blow past that, because it's so important for some of you to understand about yourselves that Jesus is in the restoration business. And he demonstrated this by taking someone who was useless, despite their name useful, Onesimus, and transformed him, restored him to now being, as Paul describes, very useful. So open yourselves up. Jesus is still in the transforming business. He's still in the restoration business. And he doesn't just restore back to like how it was. He always restores back to better. What defined your past doesn't have to define your future. All right. Now, so Paul alludes to, in this letter, to the reality that Onesimus was a servant in Philemon's house in the past, and that he'd somehow, without knowing what, wronged Philemon. And we don't need to know the specifics. We just need to know that he wronged Philemon, and you can identify with this. You can identify with this because there's people in your life and people in your past that have wronged you. They've caused you extreme disappointment. They've said things to you or about you that have been extremely damaging. They've taken advantage of your generosity. They've told lies about you that you didn't get the chance to defend yourself. They've betrayed you. Maybe, and I don't want to ever make light of this, but they may have abused you verbally, emotionally, physically, even spiritually. Any and all of these things mean that we understand what it means, like Philemon, to have had somebody do the wrong thing, to be on the receiving end of wrongdoing. And so Paul writes to Philemon, essentially asking him to forgive Onesimus. And he said this, so if you consider me your partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. Yeah, what he did in the past, it's real. No one's denying that. No one says it's okay, it's right. But this is a different person now, and I want you to open your heart to him and essentially forgive him. So I want to lean into this idea of what it looks like to forgive, especially if right now, as you're joining us, you can think of somebody. When I talked about lies and betrayal and disappointment and abuse, like there's a name. There may even be a face, like you have somebody, maybe even multiple people in mind. You can relate to this. This is personal for you. And if you, right at this very moment in time, have yet to forgive that person, in other words, you're carrying around unforgiveness, like I said earlier, it's possible, not necessarily easy, but it's possible for you to ultimately forgive them, and in doing so, to escape, to break free, to be set free from the prison of unforgiveness that's been holding you captive, from the bitterness that's been eating you alive from the inside out. And what I want to do, and I'm not going to spend long on this, I just want to kind of do a quick flyover of essentially like what forgiveness is and also what forgiveness isn't, because I've seen time and again when people have discovered and developed more clarity around what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. In other words, putting aside the misconceptions and misunderstandings, that the barriers have come down and the idea of being able to move towards forgiveness starts to look a lot more realistic. So here goes, real quick flyover, starting point. Acknowledge what happened. Don't softball it. Don't acknowledge what happened. Like what they did, what they said, what actually happened was awful. Acknowledge it to yourself. And by the way, you might even have the opportunity, not always, but sometimes, to acknowledge it to the other person. What you said to me, what you did to me, that was wrong, that was awful, that hurt me deeply. If you skip this step, it wasn't that bad. Oh, these things happen. Oh, yeah, people are people. They're going to do what they're going to do. Realistically, that is a form of gaslighting yourself. And it's actually going to dilute the possibility of you moving towards forgiveness. So acknowledge what actually happened and the pain it actually caused. Then don't wait for an apology. See, you have absolutely no control over whether the bad actor is willing or ready or going to apologize. And I got news for you today. The apology might never come, ever. But while you're sitting around waiting for the apology, what you're effectively doing is you're handing the keys to the prison of unforgiveness that you're in over to the bad actor. And you're saying to them, listen, when you're ready, how about you come and apologize and let me out? Unforgiveness doesn't chain up the bad actors. It chains you up. So don't sit. If an apology comes, that's great. Think of it as a bonus. but it's not essential to forgiveness. Now, here's one that you might already know. Forgiveness rarely feels fair. You know, we say this, kids say this, it's not fair. They hurt me. Why should I be the one to forgive? Well, I'm carrying around the pain and they look like they're just getting on with their lives. Well, that's not fair. Something bad happened to me. So from my point of view, they deserve something bad happening to them, because then, that would balance the scales of justice here. My encouragement is choose release over revenge. That forgiveness isn't about settling the score. It's about setting yourself free. Now, one very important thing that I don't think gets talked about enough, and yet when I've talked with people about this, if I've been mentoring them or coaching them in this journey of forgiveness, one thing that, it just kind of gets either overlooked, or some people don't even know that this is a thing. And that is no forced forgiveness. Okay, sure, Paul writes about we should forgive quickly, and absolutely that's the gold standard, quick forgiveness. But while it's the gold standard, it's not always possible. Genuine forgiveness isn't always possible for everybody. Sometimes you've been hurt so deeply, you feel that you're so far underwater that the idea of forgiving that person, it just seems like a far-fetched impossibility. And what I encourage people to do is make forgiveness an aspirational goal. Just like, I can't bring myself to forgive them right now. I'm too damaged. I'm too dinged up. But make it an aspirational goal. And in the run-up to that, get healthy. Go and see a counselor. Get healthy. Get your head above water and keep that aspirational goal of forgiveness on the table, so that you can ultimately stop holding on to what damaged you and start taking hold of the freedom Jesus made possible for you. All right, this is another one which, again, I see a lot of people get confused about. Forgiving isn't always coupled with forgetting. Sometimes you might forget. You're like, I just said, great. But sometimes you might not. And forgiveness and forgetting, they're not the same thing. But what I've seen time and time and time again is that when people first choose to forgive, the wounds start to heal. Now, eventually, those wounds will probably become scars, and those scars will always be visible. But, it's okay. Scars, initially you touch them and they're a little bit tender, eventually they're hard wearing. And in fact, what scars can ultimately do is remind us that thing that happened to us, that person did to us, that person said about us, it didn't work. I'm still here. I'm more resilient. I'm stronger than I'll ever be. And you might continue to remember what happened to you, but you'll associate a very different set of things with that thing that happened to you. And here's my final, really quick and very important fact about forgiveness, and that is that forgiveness doesn't require and may not lead to reconciliation and restoration. Reconciliation and restoration is about the relationship. Forgiveness is actually about you. And often you might not have any control over reconciliation. In some cases, the idea of restoration of a relationship might be a terrible idea. And that, excuse me, it might sound a little unbiblical, but here's what I want you to understand. Jesus taught us and teaches us to love unconditionally, but nowhere does he teach us to trust unconditionally. So there might be people in your rearview mirror that you need to forgive, but they haven't changed. They are just as likely to do the same thing, say the same stuff, behave exactly the same way. And the best thing for you, having forgiven them, excuse me, is to keep them way outside the boundaries. There are people who have hurt and damaged me that I don't expect I'm ever going to even see again. In fact, I don't even really care to see them again. And again, that might sound a little bit harsh, a bit unchristian. It's because I don't trust them to behave any differently should I let them back in. Okay, so that's it. Short, sharp, sweet, kind of a teaching thing. I didn't want to make it too heavy. It's not meant to be depressing. In fact, quite the opposite. We're talking here about freedom. So, look, rewatch that. Maybe you can share this. You know somebody in your sphere that, like, they'd really benefit from this. Go ahead, share this with them. Let's be set free and live free.